All right, you guys are in Luke chapter 10. If you look at verse number 30, it says, "And Jesus answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee." So here we're going to see a person that's traveling, or I guess we did already see a person that's traveling, and he gets wounded, and he's already half dead. So the title of my sermon today is The Dangers of Traveling. So you can kind of go a lot of ways with this. I guess you could write a whole sermon on just the dangers of traveling, like preaching and just all the different things, like Jesus is being, they're trying to kill him, or they're trying to kill the apostles. But this is going to be more like just generic, good advice, not necessarily going to focus on that, but you could do a whole sermon on that aspect as well. But, this story here just shows that just if you're traveling just in general, and, you're not necessarily even doing anything for God or whatever, bad things can happen, right? You hear it all the time in the news. And this guy is beaten to the point where he's half dead, and if no one would have helped him, he might have died already, right? And, a lot of us are going to travel, obviously, for church. Lots of people travel in our movement for hours and hours. People travel to conferences. People travel to mission trips. People travel all the time. People just in general around this time of the year travel for family, Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's. So it's just kind of important to have ideas of things that can happen and how to prepare, right? Because if you know about it, you're more likely to prepare for it than, being in a bad situation. So point number 1 is just going to be preparing for bad weather. So who thought you'd come to church to hear this, right? But we cover everything. So obviously bad weather, is the time of the year. So it says winter can be a dangerous time of the year for drivers. Most winter-related or weather-related deaths occur in motor vehicle accidents. In fact, across the U.S., the average icy road fatality count is nearly 4 times the total number of deaths from all other weather hazards combined. A National Weather Service analysis on winter death statistics found that about 70% of winter deaths, which include exposure, hypothermia, and traffic accidents, occur in automobiles. So this statistics combine deaths from crashes as well as those stranded and dying from exposure. So obviously the best way to deal, with potential for, dying or having bad things happen to you in any kind of bad weather instance or anything is just being right with God. So if you guys would turn to Jonah chapter 1, we're going to see an example of somebody who isn't right with God, and God can send the bad weather and the bad things to you just by being disobedient and not obeying God. So the number one thing you can do to prepare or to prevent bad weather in your life could be to just be right with God. Because in Jonah chapter 1, verse number 1, it says, "Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me." So we see here God's telling Jonah to go preach, and Nineveh's wicked. God wants him to go. And in verse number 3, Jonah disobeys. It says, "But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord." So God tells him to do something, and he's running away from God, and he's disobeying God. So in verse number 4, we're going to see the bad weather come, right? It says, but the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. So obviously, the bad weather's coming, and it doesn't just affect Jonah. It's not really in my notes or anything, but it also affects everybody else. So obviously, if somebody's disobeying God, they're not right with God, and you know that, you're probably better to stay away from them, because other people in this situation are going to have the effects of this bad weather come at them just because they're on the same ship as Jonah, right? So obviously, if you're saved, you're a soul winner, and you get backslidden, you could affect other people that aren't even saved just by, they're on the same ship as you. And, you can kind of read these stories and you think, well, the bad weather comes in the ocean, but when you experience it, it's way worse. Like, sometimes I feel bad for my wife because she goes fishing with me all the time, and, the weather apps sometimes are terrible. Like, they are not always accurate. So Brother Matt told me about one. Hopefully it's right. And we've been to some times where we went fishing, and out of nowhere, we went on the ocean, and we had this inflatable boat, and we went way out from the boat ramp area, like a few miles into the ocean. Like, we were fishing the Gulf side, or like the bay, and then it was the actual ocean, and we're like in between. And it's like beautiful sunny day in Florida, nothing. And then out of nowhere, the storm clouds come, and the waves start to get big, and like you kind of wonder, like, am I going to make it back? Because when those waves start to come and, it starts to rain, it gets very, very scary. So obviously, like Jonah in this situation, is probably a very scary situation here. So if you guys would flip over to Exodus chapter 9, we're going to see here, though, if you're right with God and the bad weather comes, storms come, God's punishing people, but you're right with God. And it's not to say that every time somebody gets punished or there's bad weather, like somebody's wicked, right? But it can cause it. It can be a thing. So obviously, to prevent that, you want to be as right with God as possible. So in Exodus chapter 9, verse 23, it says, and Moses stretched forth his rod towards heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. And in verse 24 it says, so there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast. And the hailstorm smote every herb of the field, and brake every tree in the field. So here you have hail, you have fire, you have all types of bad things happening in the trees, the herbs all being smoked because the hail's so bad. So it's a terrible place to be, right? You got thunder, just a terrible weather event, and it's probably very scary to be in. But in verse number 26, the people that are right with God, it says, only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, was there no hail. So the people that are following God, the people that are right with God, they have the blessing to avoid this catastrophe of this natural disaster, right? Of this hailstorm, and obviously God's punishing Egypt, but this weather event, as you would call it, right? And they're spared from that. They don't suffer any of it. There was no hail at all. Even though they're right next to it, they were spared from that. So obviously God can protect you if you're right with Him. It doesn't mean that that's always the case, and if you're right with God, you're never going to have anything bad happen to you, but it could. So you obviously want to try your best to prevent it. Why try to, see how bad you can be and see if God's going to punish you or not, right? You want to be as right with God as possible and be around as many righteous people as possible, because you could be spared from this, right? So you don't have to turn to these two. You guys can turn to Luke chapter 4. But in Proverbs 21:31, it says, the horse is prepared against the day of battle. So you got to prepare, but safety is of the Lord. So obviously you want to prepare, but obviously the safety is of God, right? You can prepare as much as you want, and you can still suffer, and you could be killed, you could die, but the safety is of God, right? So He still wants you to prepare, but you have to obviously remember that overall the safety's from God. And in Psalms 4:8 it says, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. So obviously, the only person who can make sure that you're always safe, the only absolute trust you can have, is that God's going to keep you safe. But, again, he wants you to prepare. Don't have an attitude of just trying to do whatever you want and trying to tempt God of like, hey, like there's a huge storm coming, I'm going to go out in the middle of the ocean like I do and risk being dead, right? It's not smart to do. So in Luke chapter 4, we're going to see the devil try to tempt Jesus to try to get him to do something he shouldn't do. And it says in Luke 4 verse 9, it says, and he brought him to Jerusalem and set him on a pinnacle of the temple and said unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down from hence, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee, and their hands shall, I'm going to read it again, sorry. And in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. And Jesus answering said unto him, it is said, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. So obviously, you shouldn't tempt God. You shouldn't try to purposely, jump off something or purposely go in bad weather or purposely do something that could harm you, because you're not supposed to tempt God, right? You're not supposed to say, hey, I'm so righteous, God would never let anything bad happen to me. Let me drive off this cliff, right? So obviously that's a terrible attitude, and you shouldn't do that, right? There's somebody we always laugh about in high school. Is like we drove really far out in the middle of like nowhere in Michigan. It's like farm country. So like if storms would come and you'd have lots of snow, the wind would just blow it all the time. So you'd have these big snow banks. So you could be stuck, bad things could happen. And there was this basketball coach from another school that I was friends with his brother, but he would show up to the game in the middle of winter where you could get stuck, your car could break down, it's like freezing cold, and he would show up with shorts and flip-flops. And that's all he would have. So like that's not what you want to do to prepare and say, hey, God's going to keep me safe. I'm just going to show up to church in a snowstorm, and all I'm going to have for safety is some flip-flops and some shorts, no winter jacket, no boots, no anything, right? You want to prepare, but obviously at the end of the day, God's going to keep you safe. So if you guys would flip over to Acts 27, because some people can say, well, I'm so righteous that God would never put me in a bad position. God would never, ever let me be caught in some storm or suffer. But we're going to see here that even, the great Apostle Paul, that he's going to suffer in a type of natural, disaster, bad weather event, whatever you want to call it, a storm. So in Acts 27, verse 40, it says, and when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea and loosed the rudder bands and hoised up the mainsail to the wind and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. So even the great Apostle Paul is stuck in the storm, bad weather. He didn't want them to sail off, but they did it anyway. And he's caught in this bad situation. And obviously God, at the end of the day, kept him safe, but he still had to suffer and, be stuck in the storm, which is obviously from experience very scary. And if you can't swim, you're holding on to stuff and hoping in that, eventually you'll get to land. But obviously, if you prepare, it's easier, right? If they would have had life jackets, if they would have had, enough boats to put people on, kind of like the Titanic, right? If you'd have had all that stuff ready to go, you could have saved everybody, but instead they weren't prepared. And, how do you prepare for this? Well, one, if you're going to go in the ocean, you should know how to swim, right? If you don't know how to swim and you're getting on a boat, it's a bad situation, right? So you want to prepare first by learning how to swim, then having your safety stuff, and preparing yourself, and not just trusting that God would never put you in a bad position, because even the Apostle Paul here is in a bad position, and obviously God kept him safe through it. But again, don't tempt God, right? You want to get yourself ready for those situations. So you guys can turn to Judges chapter 19. So I know Judges 19 ruins family camp, but we're not in family camp, right? So we're going to go there today. So I'm going to read one verse in Luke 22:36. It says, Then said he unto them, But now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip, and he that hath no sword, let him sell his garments and buy one. So obviously when Jesus left, he's telling people, hey, before you didn't need to take your purse, before you didn't need to take your scrip, before you didn't need to, have a sword, but now that I'm leaving, now have a sword, prepare yourself. Don't just go out and put yourself in danger without any sort of preparation and protection. So I'm going to read a bunch of different situations of things that happen that you should kind of have in the back of your mind when you're traveling, based on how far you're going, to prepare yourself, right? Obviously, number one is you should have a weapon, right? You should have some sort of weapon, and we'll get more to that later in the sermon. But for now, what are you preparing for when you're driving? And obviously, if you're driving 5-10 minutes to church, it's less important. But if you're driving across the country, or you're going to visit family, or you're going to do whatever, there's things to keep in mind. And one of the ideas for this was somebody by my dad's house in Michigan. They were driving with their family. They got stuck in the road, and actually the whole family ended up freezing. They had no cell phone service, and the whole family froze in the car, and they all passed away. So, it does happen, and it's something that take very serious. So, what should you prepare for? So here's a couple of things. It says large multi-day traffic standoffs happen across the U.S. every winter, often caused by a rapid, heavy snowstorm combined with a major accident like a jackknife tractor trailer that completely blocks all lanes, making it impossible for emergency crews and snowplows to get through. So here's a few examples, and there's tons more, but Interstate 95 in Virginia in January of 2022, it says hundreds of motorists were stranded for more than 24 hours in freezing temperatures. Drivers reported running out of fuel, food, and water. Even Senator Tim Kaine was among those stranded for 19 hours. The closure was made worse because the road was not pre-treated, as the snow was preceded by heavy rain. Buffalo, New York in December of 2022, it says, the event was deadly due to crashes and exposure. Many people were stranded in their cars for a long period. The storm was associated with over 40 deaths, some of whom were found in their vehicles after hypothermia or carbon monoxide poisoning due to the blocked exhaust pipes. Because obviously they get tons of snow in Buffalo, so if you don't get out every so often and get the snow away from your exhaust pipe, it's going to give you carbon monoxide poisoning. And then other people, obviously hypothermia if they don't have the right gear. So Interstate 80 in Wyoming, it says drivers, particularly truckers, are routinely stranded for several hours to over a day at a time. This usually requires them to pull off at the nearest town or rely on their emergency kits to wait out the closure. In 2025, one incident closed a stretch of I-80 for over 7 hours, stranding hundreds of motorists behind multiple semi-truck accidents. So these examples underscore the importance of having well-prepared winter emergency kits and heeding warnings from transportation officials to avoid non-essential travel during severe weather. So then there's a list of stuff that I'm going to say kind of what they recommend that you have for an emergency kit. But obviously, if you don't go hunting, you don't really understand this if you run out of gas. But if you go deer hunting and you sit in a blind and it's cold, like whatever you think is enough clothes to be warm is not enough clothes. Because if you're sitting there, as soon as that, you can have like the biggest boots, and once that cold gets through the boots, it don't matter how many socks you have on, nothing. You start to feel it, and whatever you think is enough clothes, if you're stuck for 24 hours outside with no heat, it's not enough. So definitely be very prepared and have very good things. So kind of a list of things that they recommend is blankets or sleeping bags, extra warm clothes, hats, gloves, mittens, coats, and boots. Obviously snacks and water. So first aid kits and essential medications if you have any medications. But they say ice scrapers, small snow shovels. So obviously if you get stuck in snow, you can kind of get the snow off your tires or whatever. So then they recommend also having cat litter, bags of sand, or traction mats. So once you get the snow away, you can put that under your tire to help move. Flares or reflective triangles, flashlights with extra batteries, cell phone and charger, and basic tool kits. And I always recommend Gorilla Tape and zip ties. Because when I was driving to Steadfast, the bottom of my car gave out, and I started hearing the noise, and I pulled over. The zip ties came in handy so I could put it all back together. And Gorilla Tape, too. That's a key for my vehicle as well. And then, obviously, a weapon. So I also recommend two things. I've saved a lot of people this winter that have had this already. So I bought a portable jump box for myself, and I use it for everybody else, because everybody else, I seem to go somewhere, and they're trying to start the car, and it won't start. So a portable jump box, you can buy it on Amazon. I got the lithium-ion one. It's like this big. Just put under the back seat, and then you can use it like 4 times without having to charge it, but it's kind of nice to help other people too, even if you have a good battery, and other people you just walk up to them and just you plug it, like a little wire into the battery jump box, and you set it on their car, push a button, and then they start the car up, and then, they're on their way. So it's nice for you as well, because obviously if you get stuck, it helps you, but it's definitely came in handy. I've helped a lot of people over the last 2 years since I bought it, and just parking lots. But then also a car tire pump. That has helped me on different trips to go out of town. It's just like a little, like this big, fits under my other seat, and then you can pump people's tires. I helped Rashid pump his tire on like the coldest day of the year. His tire was flat. But those are nice too. They're on Amazon. Like that's like $30, and then the portable jump box, the lithium ion, is probably like $100 to $150. So that's kind of the basic of just more basic travel safety of just weather-wise. But then there's also another aspect of travel safety, and this can obviously apply for anything, right? A mission trip. It can apply for traveling out of town or going to a conference or whatever. But obviously, the dangers of people seeking out travelers and people from out of town. So that's another danger we're going to see in Judges 19, is just people are going to look to see if you're out of town, you're a traveler, and you could be more in danger than just a normal person. Because obviously the story of Lot's a great example too, right? Like Lot's living in Sodom, but it doesn't seem like anything's really crazy's happened to Lot, but as soon as the travelers come in, then the whole town's there, right? So, I don't know what it is, but if you come from out of town, it seems like you're more likely for people to be willing to kind of pick on you or mess with you or kidnap you or do whatever. So in Judges 19, we're going to see a great example of this as well. So in Judges 19:14, it says, "And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. And they turned aside hither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat him down in a street of the city, for there was no man that took them into his house for lodging." So these people are passing by, they're trying to get home, they're stopping, they're trying to lodge, but no one is letting them in to lodge there, which is probably a good thing. It says in verse 16, it says, "And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at even, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah. But the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city. And the old man said, Whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? And he said unto him, We are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, towards the side of Mount Ephraim, from whence am I come? And I went to Bethlehem, Judah, but I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is no man that receiveth me to house. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses, and there is bread and wine also for me, and for thy handmaid, and for the young men which is with thy servants. There is no want of anything. And the old man said, Peace be with thee. Howsoever let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the street. So obviously he's got this old man that's super nice, asking him, where are you going, where are you coming from, and then come lodge with me, and he's going to help him with everything, right? So it seems like kind of a good scenario here. The guy's traveling, and some guy's going to help him out. But in verse 21, we're going to continue. It says, So he brought him into his house and gave provender unto the asses, and they washed their feet and did eat and drink. And at verse 22, it says, Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, beset the house round about and beat at the door, and came to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring forth the men that came into thine house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly, seeing that this man is come into mine house. Do not this folly. Behold, here's my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. But the men would not hearken unto him. So the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her and abused her all the night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. So obviously here we see, a story of a guy. He's going out, he's traveling, coming back home, and he seems like a good guy. And no one's going to let him in, but this old man helps him, right? So the old man obviously has been around here. So you wonder why they never did anything to him, but it seems like, this traveler's coming from out of town, and everybody sees that, so then they surround the house at night, right? And they want to do all types of wicked stuff to him, and they ended up killing, his concubine. So these people are coming from out of town, and these wicked people, these, reprobates, they seek these people that are traveling out of town, people they don't know, and for some reason, those are the people that they are after. So obviously with you going out of town, with you going to foreign countries, with you doing things, especially if you go to certain countries or certain areas, you stick out more, right? People are going to notice you. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind that for some reason, this old man, and then the same thing with Lot, it's like they're for some reason fine, or it doesn't seem to indicate that these people are at their house every single night trying to break the door down. But when that foreigner comes or that traveling person does, it seems like, you're at a higher risk, which obviously you would never feel safe if it was me around a bunch of reprobates. But for some reason, if you're traveling, it's even higher, it's even worse. And I'm going to give a bunch of reading on that. You guys can flip over to Romans chapter 1. So it seems like with this kind of idea that happens a lot on the highway. So it seems like, from what I've seen, that the highway system is kind of like this serial killer reprobate kind of area that you really want to be extra careful to be on or be around. So this is kind of something that the FBI has been working on. So it says, trucking and serial killers, the ideal hunting ground. So the long-haul trucking profession, while largely made up of law-abiding individuals, has been identified by the FBI as an environment that can be attractive to a small number of serial killers. The FBI established the Highway Serial Killing initiative within its violent criminal apprehensive program to address this pattern. So obviously for me, like, there's all kinds of reprobates, right, out there. But for me, the most dangerous kind of reprobate is the one that you don't know, and the one that looks normal, the one that, like, you would never tell, but deep inside, like, they're given over and they're a serial killer, they're a crazy person. So it seems like, from what the FBI thinks, is that there's a lot of them in this trucking thing. So why the trucking lifestyle attracts some killers. Mobility and jurisdiction hopping. The ability to travel across multiple states daily allows killer to pick up victims in one jurisdiction, commit the murder in a second, and dispose of the body in the third. This complicates the investigations and makes it difficult for local police departments to connect the crimes. So there's isolation isolation here. It says the job is often solitary and allows for long periods away from normal society, providing a direct lack of supervision. So they also have access to victims from truck stops, rest areas, major highways offer a pool of vulnerable victims, and they have mobile crime scenes. Some notorious offenders like Robert Ben Hadis or something, the truck stop killer, have used their semi-truck cabs or sleeper as mobile torture and holding cells. So the scale of the problem, the FBI estimates that there's over 750 to 850 murder victims whose bodies have been found along U.S. highways. The suspects in these cases are predominantly long-haul truckers. The Bureau has listed nearly 450 potential suspects related to these unsolved cases. Well, the primary victims are high-risk people that shouldn't be at truck stops, but women or whatever. It says any solitary individual stranded on a highway shoulder. So somebody who's broken down on the highway is at high risk. A rest area, remote roadsides can be seen as a vulnerable target by optimistic predators. So I've seen that they say, hey, people, like, especially like in there's certain areas in the country where you travel that there's no cell phone service. So those are big areas. If you break down, like, those people know that, like, there's no service in that area. I think there was like a stretch, and maybe if you're going to Anchor Baptist, you might go through it, but it was like between Arkansas and Oklahoma, there's like a huge stretch where there's no cell phone service at all. And they said people will, like, pretend to be broken down, so then you help them. And then, like, it's just all natural or national parks or something, like national forests. So there's nothing around for miles, no lights, no nothing. They pretend to be broken down, you help them, and then, you're a goner, right? So it's just something to be very careful about when you travel. Because I never knew any of this, so I've slept, like, in the car, like in the truck stops, in the in the rest areas, and I'm just like, I don't put anything over the windows. I just go to sleep, like, right in the car. So, don't be like me. Be careful. But obviously, always have a weapon, right? Because obviously that's the number one thing. If you have a weapon and you're prepared to use it, I do sleep with the gun next to me, so that's the positive thing. But obviously, to be careful, right? You probably should cover the windows or do things so they don't really know where you're at, what you're doing. So obviously, in Romans chapter 1, we know these people, can have reprobate minds. They just don't even care about anything. So in Romans chapter 1, verse 28, it says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things that are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So obviously, there's just tons of evil people out there. And, apparently trucking is like one that, attracts them. But obviously, if you look at truckers, like, you wouldn't just think like, oh yeah, that's for sure a reprobate, because most of them just look like normal dudes. Obviously now there's lots of people who don't speak English, but previously it's just normal people that just look like any member of society, that you're kind of like just a normal guy. But obviously, hey, there's reprobates out there that you have no clue just by looking at them that they're reprobate. So you want to be careful and just don't only assume some dude wearing a dress that's the reprobate. It's like there's reprobates that are probably arguably more dangerous specifically for you because you don't even know that they are, right? So your guard's down, you're not paying attention, and just like that guy traveling in Judges 19, like if somebody else would have offered to take him in, the situation could have been even worse. It's already really bad, but it could have been worse if some reprobate said, hey, why don't you come stay with me today or whatever, right? So you want to be very careful who you trust, who you're around, because these people, they don't have any natural affection, and they're inventors of evil things. And if you look at what the Catholics did, throughout the Dark Ages, people can invent some very, very crazy and things that you couldn't even imagine yourself, right? So you guys can flip over to 2 Samuel 20. So obviously there's all types of reprobates. One of them's false prophets, not really in the sermon, but the same thing applies to these people who are serial killers, murderers, people who are just looking to devour people. It says in Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. So all types of reprobates on every kind of spectrum. Inside they're like a wolf. They're just looking to destroy you. They want to hurt you. And it doesn't matter if it's, looks like a normal person, right? That person deep inside could literally just be like a wolf. Like they just want to just hurt you so bad. And, on the outside they look like a sheep, right? But deep inside they're dangerous. So in 2 Samuel 20, we're going to see this thing of, people can kind of hide their intentions. People can hide how they really are inside their ravening wolf. Not saying that necessarily Joab's reprobate, but we're going to use that story in how he is with Amasa. In 2 Samuel 20, verse 9, it says, and Joab said to Amasa, art thou in health, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with the right hand to kiss him. So obviously the same thing is these people, or people that want to hurt you. And even people who aren't reprobate can be like this, but obviously serial killers and reprobates are the easiest and to talk about. But even people that are saved, we see King David do bad things. People can have an intention on the outside of like a sheep. Inwardly, they want to kill you. So in verse 10, we're going to see that it says, but Amasa took no heed to the sword that was in Joab's hand, so he smote him therewith in the fifth rib, and shed out his bowels to the ground, and struck him not again, and he died. So Joab fakes being, this nice guy, wants to, reach out, give him a kiss or whatever, and, he kills him. He has this intention of just wanting to kill him. And we already kind of talked about this a little bit, but some more information on it as well as fake distresses. So there you have the people who are the truckers that get you at the vulnerable places like the rest stop, the side of the road or whatever. But then you also have people who are going to fake distress and look like this innocent person, but deep inside they want to hurt you. So that's another thing that's going on. It says here there's fake distress. The goal of the criminal in this scenario is to isolate and engage a victim by appealing to their helpful nature. A common scenario might involve fake distress signal. A person may be standing outside a vehicle with a hood up or simply appearing distraught, signaling to passing motorists that they need assistance. They appeal to compassion. The person may claim that they need a ride to the nearest phone, gas station, or town, or ask for help with a flat tire, and then they attack. It says once the victim has stopped and engaged, the attacker may physically overpower them or may have an accomplice hiding nearby who joins the attack. So I've seen that, lots of examples on that road going to Oklahoma, where they supposedly, people stop and they break down and there's no cell phone service there, so people who stop to help, there's people hiding in the woods or things can happen, and then, you stop and then you're kidnapped or bad things happen. And obviously, you see all the kids even just going to Walmart where they have a whole list of kids on the wall that, people kidnapped and they're missing, right? So this kind of stuff can happen in lots of different scenarios. Obviously, I'm just focusing more on, driving and cars and traveling. But obviously, this can happen in all types of capacities, so you want to be careful and think about and maybe even look into in your area what are things happening and where are people at and what kind of the crimes in your area that you're going or that you live in to prepare and avoid it. So you guys can flip over to 2 Kings 6. That'll be the last place I have you turn. 2 Kings chapter 6. So obviously, it's kind of bad news, right? Where, people being kidnapped or bad things can happen. But obviously, God can always protect you, and there's always more people with you than there is, with the criminals, right? So in 2 Kings chapter 6, we're going to end on a high note here and make it more positive. It says in 2 Kings 6:12, it says, "And one of his servants said, None, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, Go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, Behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore sent he hither horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about." So obviously this is kind of on par, right, with Judges 19, the story of Lot. They're sending a great host, and they're compassing the whole city, not just the house here. But it's a scary thing, right? There's all these people wanting to kill you or harm you. And this is definitely probably a better situation. I'd rather be in this than the story of Lot, though, because I'd rather just be killed by an army. So in verse number 15, we're going to continue. It says, "And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, what shall we do? And he answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. And he opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, Smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. So obviously, hey, you could be in a bad position, bad things happen. The story of Lot. Lot did a lot of things he probably shouldn't have been. He shouldn't have been in that city. He should have been trying to see more people saved, and probably should have been living a better life, and all types of stuff Lot probably should have been doing, but God still saved him. And then here you have a great man of God, and he's even in a the magnitude of this is even higher, where they're compassing the whole city, and it's a huge army, and God even has more people protecting Elisha than that, right? He gets him out of this. He gets Lot out of it. He gets Jonah out of it. So obviously, at the end of the day, you got to rely on God, but you obviously should, do your best to keep yourself out of those situations, right? If you're going to a mission, you're going to go on a mission trip, or you're going to go on like a cross-country trip, you should probably look into where you're going. And not saying I always do this, I should too, right? But obviously you should look into what the crimes, should you go out at night, is it safe, what's the areas you should be more careful, not careful. So there's always things, depending where you're going, that you want to look into. And obviously you have kids, it's probably even more strict, right? Or people, is it a high human trafficking area, or is it more safe? And then obviously, you should make a plan or tell people things based on that, because even where my grandma lives, there was, two people that had gotten kidnapped up there in the middle of nowhere in the woods, and they were looking for the two kids. They were just, missing. So obviously this stuff happens all the time, and it seems like it's getting worse and worse, and you hear about human trafficking a ton now in America. So, obviously it happens, but obviously God can protect you, but you should still try your best to, prepare yourself as well. And we're going to end on one verse. You have to turn there, but in Psalms 112, verse 7, it says, "The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and forevermore." So obviously, God can make sure that nothing bad happens to you. God can get you out of any situation. God can do anything. So obviously, at the end of the day, if you trust God, you're serving God, you're doing everything you should, and God's going to want you here because He doesn't have enough workers as it is. But at the end of the day, He still wants you to do your best, to prepare, to do things. He doesn't just want you just to have a flippant attitude and just, like sometimes you go soul winning and kids are answering the door and running around. And one time me and my wife went soul winning, and we were in Cincinnati, and you just see kids like running around or whatever just by themselves, and there's no parents, there's nothing, and it's just like this little kid is running around doing whatever, and then it's just like they could be kidnapped, they could be gone. So don't just be a flippant person, and just try to do your best to make sure that you're being the best you can be and keeping people safe. But at the end of the day, remember that God is the ultimate one that's going to keep you safe. So we can close on a word of prayer. Thank you, Lord, for a great day today. Thank you for letting us be able to see some people get saved. And please just continue to keep everybody in this church safe, and continue to bless us and let us have a good rest of the year. And in Jesus' name we pray, amen.